Right. Thank you for joining me, whether you're joining me live or on the recording later on. We're going to be talking about the Great Fire of London this evening, 1666, the fire that destroyed 80% of the old city of London. That's the bit within the city walls, within the Roman and medieval walls. Breaks out in the early hours of the morning of the 2nd of September, 1666. There are about 100,000 people made homeless by it. Hundreds of homes, thousands of homes destroyed. Takes 50 years to properly rebuild the city. And millions of pounds in value of goods and property completely wiped off the face of the earth. And remember, this is a time before insurance, so huge losses by people. Just to sort of start by saying where we are, saying what's happening, this is the whole of the City of London in the 1650s. The area that we're concerned with is in the centre, the old city, the former Roman heart of Londinium. By this point, 1666, the city is, well, somewhere between 350 and 500,000 people. Estimates vary, but it is thought to be at least 400,000, and most historians, a sort of mean figure works out to be about 450,000. So it is a big city. It is probably the second or third biggest city in Europe, bigger than any other British city by a country mile. The next biggest cities are probably 20 or 30,000 people. You have in the centre the old heart, and then the suburban areas that have spread out beyond the city walls. You can notice ribbon development going out in the roads away from that central part. Developments on the south side of London Bridge near Southwark. You have got a new area growing up around the city of Westminster, the royal area where Whitehall is, where the Palace of Westminster is, and the royal parks, and in between some more pleasant houses. There'd been the development in Covent Garden in the 1630s, for example. Properties bought by rich people who are wanting to move out of the way of the filth, the smell, the overcrowding of the City of London itself. And the view over the river, from Southwark, you have got what is these days called Southwark Cathedral here. Back then was called All Saints, or St. Mary Overy, St. Mary over the river. You can see Old St. Paul's, the Norman church that is there on the north bank, the bridge, and occupied a little town in itself, several hundred people living and working on that bridge. It's a city of church spires. It is a trading place. There are warehouses all along the river. The population of the city itself, that bit within the walls, is about 100,000 people. So about a quarter of the city are living within those walls. And again, just to have a look at the City of London itself, you might just see the line of the Roman wall coming down here. St. Paul's Cathedral in the middle. You can notice these tightly packed houses coming down here. Can't really see it on this map, but there is the River Fleet, or the Fleet Ditch, which used to mark one of the boundaries of the City of London, a waterway that Canaletto paints in the 1700s and makes it look like a glorious Venetian canal. In reality, it was a pretty stinking ditch, but it did form a barrier between the City of London and the space out to the west, and will become important later on. The city itself is governed, it clings to its ancient rights that predate the Norman conquest. So the Lord Mayor, someone called Sir Thomas Bloodworth, has got sort of royal prerogatives within the city of London itself. It has been a trading centre for hundreds of years. It is run by a court of aldermen, uh, city nobles, city merchants. It is very proud of its rights and its facilities to run things. Um, the previous years, it has suffered. In 1665, there is an outbreak of the plague. Maybe 70,000 people killed in London. Certainly a lot of people fled the city. Newton, for example, flees the city to go to Cambridge. This is where he comes up with his theory of gravity once he's left London because of the outbreak of plague. And there'd been an expectation that summer, the summer of 1666, that perhaps the plague would come back again. It was cyclical. If the weather is hot, the plague tends to recur. So there'd been a big outbreak in 1665, but it doesn't seem to have come back in 1666. The court, the royal government, the king has moved back into the city at this point, and has re-established the royal court at Whitehall. We're at a time as well where all sorts of other things are going on. The Second Anglo-Dutch War is taking place. We have been fighting the Dutch in naval battles. We've lost one, but recently one of the British admirals has raided a Dutch town, burnt the merchant vessels, burnt the town to the ground, Holmes's bonfire, as it was called. The French have also joined in that war. Louis XIV, the Sun King, has declared war on England. So there is this atmosphere of worry, of portent. Christopher Wren and Robert Hooke, we'll meet them both later, but at this point they're in Oxford. They're scientists as much as anything. They've playing around with new telescopes, and they see a comet in the sky with their new telescope. And comets are always bad things in the Middle Ages and the later Middle Ages. So they seem to foretell all sorts of deadly occurrences. So the city is in a sort of mood of something. Just to give you an idea of what the city's like, this is a couple of images of York as it is now, what's called the Shambles. The Shambles were a sort of charnel house, really. That's where sort of butchers were. But this gives you a sense of perhaps some of those tightly packed streets in the city of London at this point. There is a thought that all the buildings are made of wood, that they've all got thatched roofs. That's not actually really the case. Most of the roofs were made of tile, but these are buildings that are wooden framed. So they are they provide a source for a fire to take place. And one of the real problems that London faces is that August has been incredibly dry. It has suffered from a heat wave. So the wood that does exist, and most of the material that could catch fire, is basically tinder dry and waiting to go up. You have other issues as well in the medieval towns. You can notice how in these buildings, each floor sticks out more. This is called jettied buildings. And in some of the very narrow streets of the city of London, it is said that you could virtually reach out of the window of a house on one side of the street and shake hands with someone reaching out of the window on the other side of the street. You've also got lots of signs. It is a very cluttered street view. So people at the time would report of walking down some of the streets in the middle of the day, and it is almost dark in that time because there is so much obstruction above you. Um, it is a street where people live and work in the same buildings. We don't have that demarcation that we do in modern buildings. You have got warehouses and merchants and inns and stables pressed up against living accommodation. Uh, and this again is part of the issue that really makes a difference to the outbreak of the flames. This is a little plaque on the wall of a very ugly 1980s building that is in Pudding Lane in the City of London. And Pudding Lane is just to the north and the east, somewhere in this tightly packed area in just north of London Bridge. We are at the baker's shop of a Mr. Thomas Fariner. It is generally agreed that this is where the fire started. He is a baker. The plaque on the wall says he is the king's baker. Now that makes him sound very grand indeed. He makes ship's biscuits, hardtack. It is not, he's not making fine cakes and delicate pastries. The area that we're in is not a pleasant place. Pudding in the Middle Ages were the entrails, the intestines of animals. We're in a street where blood from slaughterhouses would have run down the lanes. So Mr. Fariner, the baker, is making hardtack biscuits in his own home. The oven would be on the ground floor or in the basement. Baking these, and these would be provisions for the King's Navy. What should have happened, what happened every other day, was that the fire should have been raked out, the fire in the oven raked out, and it should have been made absolutely perfectly clear that that fire had been extinguished. For whatever reason, this doesn't happen on the night of the 1st of September, and in the early hours of the morning, sometime between 1 and 2 o'clock, the fire breaks out in the oven. The oven that hasn't been properly extinguished sets fire to the house. Now, this isn't particularly unusual. There were always fires in London. This is a city that is run on open flame, candles, lamps. You are cooking on a open fire. You are doing metalworking. You are baking on open fires. There were always fires. What makes it a real problem this time is that there is a gale blowing from the east. So this has sprung up on the Saturday afternoon. Strong winds blowing, and it's the confluence of these seemingly random events that cause the fire to spiral out of control. The fire starts. Mr. Fariner is woken up by his manservant, and general panic in the house. There is smoke downstairs. You can imagine flames, smoke coming up, and there's no way out. So what they do is they open one of the windows, climb out, make their way along to the house next door, climb in or rattle on the window so that they're let in. So Mr. Fariner, his daughter, and their manservant get themselves into the next house. The first casualty of the fire is the maidservant in the house, who is too scared. She, whatever reason, she doesn't like heights, to make her way out of that window and shuffle along the rooftops to the next house. So the first person, we don't know a name, unfortunately, she is anonymous to us, but the first victim of the fire is the maidservant in Thomas Fariner's house. As I say, there were always fires. And there were systems in place for putting them out. Couple of things here from the Museum of London. On the left, you have what's called a squirt. These are sort of two-person operated, like a sort of water bellows. You put them in a bucket or in a river or another source of water, pull the plunger out, it fills with water, push the plunger in, the water squirts out again. Bucket chains is a leather bucket from the Museum of London. So bucket chains would be set up with crowds of citizens passing the buckets from hand to hand to throw onto the flames. There was a relatively sophisticated sort of network of elm water pipes and aqueducts throughout the city, throughout the road network. And if there was a fire, they'd be blocked off or diverted so that a source of water could come down so that these buckets could be filled and again thrown on the flames. There were even some very early fire engines. This is a Victorian photo of one of those sort of 17th century fire engines. They're essentially great big water tanks, big sort of pumps on either side. They didn't have fire hoses. There was a sort of brass nozzle, and after you'd filled it full of water and worked those great levers on the side, water would jet out. So you had to get very close to the flames in order for those to work. But there were a number of those situated at strategic points around the city, including the biggest of them all, which was down at Clerkenwell, which, as the fire progressed during the Sunday, was brought down towards London Bridge, where it was taken to the river to be filled up and then slipped into the river and disappeared below the waves. They weren't particularly practical. They tended to arrive late, if they arrived at all, either when the fire was out of control or when the fire had been put out by other means. But the London love of new technology meant that there were these ones spread around the city. The main bit of work, though, that went on to putting fires out was much more simple. You can see here on this wood print of the time, people being lowered from the flames, buckets here with people throwing these buckets of water to try and extinguish the flames. But over here, on this side, you have got what's called a fire hook. These were long poles with metal hooks at the end with a big metal ring in them on which you tied ropes. They were usually stored in the local parish church because that was a known place, and you essentially pull down the buildings in the path of the fire. If they've got a thatched roof, you can pull the straw off and extinguish that. If the fire looks even more significant, you can try and get ahead of it and pull down buildings that are in its path. And there is some element of trying this, and I'll come back to that in a second. What the fire starts, this plaque is currently in Fish Street. It is right next to the monument to the Great Fire, which I'll come to towards the end. The problem that we have with this fire, as I say, fires all the time. They were put out, they were dealt with. There had been a fire 30 or 40 years previously that had destroyed a few hundred houses just to the north of London Bridge, and in fact destroyed a few properties on London Bridge, which helps here because that provides a fire break, stops the bridge being destroyed. But the problem with Mr. Farriner's fire is that mix of circumstances. It is taking place at the worst possible time, the early hours of Sunday morning. So when everybody is resting from their week's labours Sundays, work didn't happen. You went to church. So people would have gone to bed. They would have been trying to sleep through it. We have had that drought. We have got that gale blowing from the east, and that is the real significant thing. That is taking burning embers, burning straw, carrying that up into the air, taking it down streets away from where the original fire is. It's also happening in a particularly bad area for a fire to break out. The streets are incredibly narrow in this old part of town going down to the river. It's impossible to get these newfangled fire engines in there. The roads are quickly clogged with people moving their goods away. So anything movable you picked up, you took it to a friend's house, you took it and tried to store it so that if your property was lost, most people rented their properties rather than own them. If your property was lost, at least the goods that you had were saved. That area as well, leading down to the river, you have got the warehouses, the wharves that goods are unloaded into. You have got oily fish, you have got pitch, you've got coal, you've got timber, you've got flax, all stored in those warehouses. These are very sort of combustible materials. One of the other issues is that, as I mentioned before, you have got different properties all sort of mingle together around there. The next street down, it has something called the Star Inn. Inns in those days would have a stable attached. So the flames get to the Star Inn, they go into the hay in the stables, the wind picks that up, and again it carries it off. The Museum of London have done some archaeology around there, and 2 or 3 doors down from Mr. Farriner's house was some sort of general merchant. And within the basement of that, they found the sooty remains of what were presumably 2 big barrels of pitch that, once the flames got to those, simply exploded, carrying the flames up into the air and destroying houses, destroying property. Moeller have estimated that the flames, the heat of the fires, got to maybe 1700 degrees Celsius in some places. We are seeing iron fused. We are seeing the locks on some of the gates into the City of London virtually melted by the heat that is caused. A lot of the records that we have, or the eyewitness testimony that we've got, come from the 2 gentlemen here, a couple of diarists. John Evelyn on the right, perhaps lesser known. He was well connected with the court, a gardener, a writer, an author. And on the left, Samuel Pepys, famous for his diary that tells us all about the Restoration, the monarchy coming back in the 1660s, and in particular the diary that he kept during the time of the fire. He lives just a few streets away, about a quarter of a mile away, a place called Seething Lane, from where the fire breaks out. But he is upwind of it. So he is to the east of the flames. His maid wakes him up in the middle of the night and says, "Oh, there's a fire going on. It's not too far away." And Pepys opens the window and looks out and isn't particularly worried about it. As I say, there are always fires. It seems to be moving in the other direction. He wakes up the next morning, though, and the news is getting a little bit bleaker. The story is that at least 300 buildings have already been destroyed, that the flames have reached London Bridge itself, and that things are sort of getting out of hand. What should have happened, what may have made a difference, is if the Lord Mayor of London, who has overall responsibility for them, this gentleman called Sir Thomas Bloodworth, had got a bit of a grip earlier on. But he has history sort of agrees that he had a very bad fire. He is woken up in the middle of the night, taken down to Pudding Lane, shown that this fire is burning. The recommendation from his workers is that they should start pulling down buildings in the path of the fire on Fish Street Hill and further on. But Bloodworth, being a London merchant, being elected by other London merchants, is reluctant to pull any of these buildings down because no one knows who owns them. And what he doesn't want is to have the responsibility of destroying other people's property. So he sort of huffs and puffs a bit. The recommendations come that he burns, that he pulls these buildings down, but he takes exception to this. He sort of figuratively stamps his foot and said, no, this really isn't a fire, he said. An old woman could piss this out, he says. And he goes back to bed. So this allows the fire to continue. And as I say, by the time Pepys wakes up, he's getting a bit concerned. He knows someone at the Tower of London. He knows a relative of the lieutenant of the Tower, which is just 100 yards or so from where he lives. So he goes to the Tower, climbs up the White Tower, that main central core within the Tower of London complex, and he says in his diary, I made myself ready and walked to the tower, and there got up upon one of the high places, and there I did see the houses at that end of the bridge all on fire, and an infinite great fire on this and on the other side, other end of the bridge. He means to the west of the bridge. So it's already past the streets that led down to the bridge itself. So it is starting to get out of control. And Pepys is a very good organizer. He knows how to do things. He has got a very good brain on him. He's secretary to the Navy office. He's concerned with the sort of victualling and the supplies of the Navy down at Greenwich and Rotherhithe. And he commissions a rowboat and is rowed up to the court so that he can tell the king just what is going on. The fire by this point is raging even more. John Evelyn, the other diarist that I mentioned, by the evening of that night is saying, after dinner we beheld the dismal spectacle, the whole city in dreadful flames near the waterside. All the houses from the bridge, all Thames Street, and upward towards Cheapside, down to the Three Cranes, were now consumed. Pepys goes to see the king, tells him of the fact that the city is burning, that it seems to be a more significant fire than more recent ones, that something needs to be done. The king, Charles II, come to him in a second, offers, there isn't a standing army at this point, but Charles II has got his regiments of lifeguards, offers soldiers that can go down and help, sends Pepys off to command Bloodworth to do anything that is necessary. The king, he says, will take responsibility for that. And Pepys then it talks to the king's brother, the Duke of York. He later becomes James II on the death of Charles II. The Duke of York says he will take overall control if necessary. He just has to say the word. Pepys goes back down the river, meets the Lord Mayor, who is by this point running around a little bit like a headless chicken. So Pepys gives him the message, and to the king's message, Bloodworth cried, "Lord, what can I do? I am spent. People will not obey me. I've been pulling down houses, but the fire overtakes us faster than we can do it." He also said that he needed no more soldiers, and that for himself he must go and refresh himself having been up all night. So Bloodworth is basically just saying, I've had enough of this. He goes off and goes to bed. There is this independence of the City of London is another of the reasons why action isn't taken sooner. The king has offered soldiers, he's offered the lifeguards, but remember, we are 15, 16 years after the Civil War, when the City of London was very much on the parliamentarian side against the monarchy. There is a fear that there is a fear of royal power, there are a fear of royal soldiers. So it is not until a few days later that it is finally agreed that soldiers can enter the City of London and help the work that is going on. Pepys also says at this point, we go back to this figure as he goes down the river, that he in very little time the fire had got to the steel yard. This is the bit going westward along the river, another area of warehouses and wharves, and everybody was endeavouring to remove their goods and flinging them into the river or bringing them into lighters. Those are little boats that lay off. Poor people staying in their houses as long as till the very fire touched them, and then running into boats or clambering from one pair of stairs by the waterside to another. People moving their goods. It's a bit like a sort of refugee situation. If you've got a cart, you are flinging your goods into them and then trying to move it out. If you don't, you're trying to hire one, or you're trying to hire a boat. There are gangs of people looting, essentially, as houses have been vacated. People are going in and robbing them. There are stories of the middling classes hiring people to take their goods away by cart and never seeing those goods again. The lightermen in the river, the ones with the boats, are charging premium prices to move things, try and move them to safety. This is standard for a fire in London. You would move something half a mile, you would move something to a friend. Pepys himself has got friends moving goods and property into his house about half a mile away. That is later has to be moved further on. So you have this moving and removing that is going along. One of the most poignant things that Pepys records as he's going down the river, looking at these burning houses as he's going, people would keep pigeons for food, or pigeons would sometimes nest in the eaves of houses. And Pepys writes, among other things, the poor pigeons were loath to leave their houses, but hovered about the windows and balconies till they were, some of them, burnt their wings and fell down. So Pepys gives us this wonderful colour of what is happening, and part of that is these poor birds that are sent airborne by the flames but don't want to move far away from their roosts. The flames catch them, burn their wings, and they drop down to the ground. So the fire is moving, it is spreading. If we just get up this little map, we can see starts over here. Here is London Bridge, here's the waterfront. On the Sunday, it has, within 24 hours, there probably 1,000 homes have been destroyed. 9 churches, 6 of the livery halls. These are the communal buildings of the various city guilds. It is spreading westward because of those flames. The wharves all along the river with their flammable goods are catching. It continues to spread throughout the Monday. That gale is still continuing. This is a print after the event. It's by someone, a Dutch illustrator, but it sort of gives a sense of it. There are some very good eyewitness accounts of that. John Evelyn writes that the fire having continued all night, so this is him writing on the Monday morning, if I may call that night, which was as light as day for 10 miles around. So he's saying that the flames are lighting up the area. Slightly prone to exaggeration is our John Evelyn, but we can say that there were flames burning. So the fire conspiring with a fierce eastern wind in a very dry season. I went and saw the whole south part of the city burning from Cheapside to the Thames and all along Cornhill, for it had likewise kindled back against the wind. Tower Street, Fenchurch Street, Gracious Street, now Grace Church Street, and so along to Baynard's Castle, a large medieval space close to modern day Blackfriars, and was now taking hold of St. Paul's Church. So this is coming into the Tuesday. The fire is going back against the prevailing wind towards the east, towards the Tower of London, which is worrying people considerably because the Tower of London is the main gunpowder store. If the tower goes up, the explosion is going to be so great that London is going to be utterly devastated. Pepys at this point is recording that he is on an alehouse on Bankside. So Pepys never missing a chance for a drink. So this is Bankside over on the south of the river. Down along here a bit would have been the Globe, the Rose Theatre in Elizabethan times. We are close to modern day Southwark Cathedral. So Pepys at an alehouse on the Bankside and saw the fire grow, and as it grew darker, appeared more and more, and in corners and upon steeples, and between churches and houses, as far as we could see up the hill of the city, in a most horrid, malicious, bloody flame, not like the fine flame of an ordinary fire. We saw the fire as only one entire arch of fire from this to the other side of the bridge. So from this side right the way across, an arch of above a mile long. It made me weep to see it. The churches, houses, and all on fire and flaming at once, and a horrid noise the flames made, and the cracking of houses at their ruins. So it is obvious that this is a massive blaze. It is still out of control. James II has become the Duke of York, has now taken control of the firefighting. He's trying to organize groups of firefighters. There are rendezvous stations all along the Fleet River. They're hoping to hold the flames at the River Fleet, just beyond the city walls in the west, to stop it burning, to carry across there. But we have this issue that the wind is so strong that you can be attacking the fire, you can be pulling buildings down, but the fire is leaping the fire breaks. We also have this issue that it is such an immense, stunning conflagration. You hear some of that in the words of Pepys, that people are sort of stunned. They don't know what to do. They don't know how to react to it. They are too busy trying to evacuate. What buildings are pulled down are too little, are too late. They're also not clearing the grounds, and the fire is burning their way through that. It is a time of rumour and panic. We know now that the fire started in Mr. Farriner's bakery. It started from the flames that were burning, that weren't put out in the fire. But there are rumours, there are conspiracies going around. It is said that the city has been fired by the Dutch as preparation for invasion, and there are stories of Dutch armies landing up the coast. It is said that it is a Catholic plot, that Frenchmen, Jesuits, are firebombing buildings. There are many reports of anyone who appears foreign or speaks with a foreign accent being attacked in the street. There is a Frenchman, or a man rather, caught with a box of tennis balls. And people think these are fire bombs, and he's virtually lynched there in the streets. It is becoming obvious that things are getting completely out of hand, and that is most obvious when St. Paul's goes up in flames. So old St. Paul's, the heart of the city, the church has been there since 1100. At one point, it was the tallest building in London. It lost its spire in the reign of Elizabeth I. But when the spire was there, it was about 500 feet tall. I said the tallest building in London. It's the tallest building in Europe at one point. An absolutely huge, vast building. It is the heart of the city. Think of it in terms of how Parisians think of Notre Dame. It is the biggest thing most people in London would ever have seen in their lives. It is a market. There is a space around it. It's the place of worship. Although I have to say at this point it is a little bit damaged. It has suffered in the Civil War. It hasn't been restored. There has been moves to improve it, to modernize it. And ironically, in August 1666, Sir Christopher Wren, surveyor of the City of London, had climbed up the tower, surveyed the building, and had produced his plans for the restoration and the reconstruction of London's mother church, the mother cathedral. And in fact, scaffolding, wooden scaffolding, had already been put up, already gone over the roof. And this may be one of the reasons why the fires took hold so well on the roof. It burnt. By the Tuesday, witnesses saw the flames appear on the roof. Again, these sparks, burning embers being caught by the wind. And this indestructible church, it had been there for 500 years. It was something everyone who lived in London knew. It is an important part of the London consciousness. It is going up in flames. It is almost exploding with the heat that is there. Not helped by the fact that in the area around St. Paul's, you have a lot of printers and stationers. The stationers company is just up the way. The area around St. Paul's churchyard was full of publishers, bookbinders. When the fire breaks out in Pudding Lane, as it spreads, these people move their stocks, they move their paper, the unbound books, all of their work into the crypt of St. Paul's Cathedral. It's a huge stone building. It's been there for 500 years. Of course, it's never going to burn down. But as the flames take hold, the burning beams crash down into the church, and there is yet another source of flammable material for the flames to catch hold of. John Evelyn reports that the stones of St. Paul's flew like grenadoes. The heat is so strong that the stones are exploding. The melting lead running from the roof down the streets in a stream, and the very pavements glowing with fiery redness. So it is a huge, huge destruction that is going on. By this time, Oxford, 40 miles away that night, sees the moon as blood red. The reflection of the flames, if you like, appearing to be on the surface of the moon. There is a column of smoke over the city of London that can be seen 15 miles away. It is approaching almost an apocalyptic level of destruction. The worst day is this Tuesday when St. Paul's catches, the Guildhall, another big stone building right in the centre of London. That also burns. The roof of that goes. Mansion House, the home of the Lord Mayor of London, burns. The Royal Exchange, the main hub of commerce in the city of London, another great stone building, that burns down as well. So we are reaching a point where it looks like the devastation is just going to continue and continue. As I say, the flames are incredibly hot. Iron is fusing. Glass is melting out of windows. The streets are full of people fleeing and blocking gates. By this point, James II is sending troops in to pull buildings down, but often what they're having to navigate their way through the refugees, or they're having to step in and save foreigners from being lynched. There is a report from a schoolboy walking through the city who says he saw a Frenchman trying to flee the flames and being cut down by a man with an iron bar and virtually clubbed to death in the street. By this time, it has crossed the River Fleet. This is London Bridge. The fire has broken out here. You can see it spreading towards the tower. It has crossed the Fleet ditch. It is making its way seemingly inexorably westward during that Wednesday. There is panic in Whitehall. Down here is Whitehall Palace. The stables around Somerset House are pulled down to be destroyed so that the flames can't catch. The Royal Treasury is being loaded onto carts, and the women of the royal household are preparing to leave the city to go to Hampton Court. Over in the east, things are slightly better. The constable of the tower has been acting on his own cognition and has called in sailors from the Navy, and they have destroyed houses, literally blown them up. They've taken barrels of gunpowder and blown up streets to stop the fire spreading eastwards. Again, this great fear that if the flames reach the tower and the gunpowder goes up there, it will be utterly devastated. And then on Wednesday, things change. Pepys, at this point, most famously, of all his goods, most of the goods he sends off further east towards Barking, towards friends, but he famously buries in his garden, as he thinks the flames are approaching, some gold, his wine, and a Parmesan cheese. So he is obviously a big cheese fan, and this is what lots of people are doing. They are digging holes in the earth, in the ground, burying their treasures in order to come back to them later. But then the wind changes. So there have been lots of buildings blown up over here in the west to control the flames, but the wind, this gale, we're not just talking a strong breeze, it has been a gale. It is a gale that sprung up in the Channel on the Saturday, and in fact the British and Dutch fleets on that Saturday had been manoeuvring for a major sea battle, but when the gale hit them, they both ran for cover. The British fleet ends up in the Isle of Wight, the Dutch fleet back in Holland. So this is a major storm that is there for 4 days. But once that wind abates, the work that the Duke of York's been doing, the work that the soldiers have been doing, the pulling down of buildings, the clearing of the debris, allows that fire break to take place, allows the fire to be brought under control. So by the Wednesday, the worst is over. There are still, obviously, buildings burning. There are reports, even months later, of smoke issuing from some of the basements in the city. And you are left with a ruined city. It is not. It is not leveled. Think of those photos that you might have seen of London or other cities after major bombing. You have got ruins and rubble everywhere. It is, you have got smoking heaps. You have got the smell of the burning buildings and goods that have been taken place. There is someone from Newcastle who writes to his brother who says that London is not a city anymore. It looks more like the fells of Northumberland, the sort of wild moors up there. John Evelyn writes of it that London was but is no more. Once this is cleared, blame starts to be put through. So originally, there is an inquiry, and Thomas Fariner is questioned. He is asked whether he put his oven out. Of course I did, yes. Can absolutely categorically state that fire was put out. These rumors, these tales that have gone around, that it was the Dutch or the French or the Jesuits sort of enter common currency. And one Frenchman who is arrested trying to leave the country, Mr. Robert Hubert, actually admits to starting the fire. He says that he threw a firebomb through the window of Fariner's Bakers. He takes the court to where the bakery was and says, "This is where I started it." The only slight problem with that is that he wasn't in London when the fire broke out. We don't know why he admitted to starting the flames, but in his court case, he still says that he started it, and he is hanged for this. Even the judge who condemns him doesn't believe him, but because he has pleaded guilty to starting the fire, the only sentence is hanging, and he is hanged at Tyburn. The monument to the Great Fire, which I'll come to in a second, used to have this plaque on it. It was taken away in the 1700s when wiser councils prevailed. Here, by the permission of heaven, hell broke loose upon this Protestant city from the malicious hearts of barbarous paperists by the hand of their agent Hubert, who confessed, and on the ruins of this place declared the fact for which he was hanged. So very much blaming the political situation at the time. Another slight problem with this is that Hubert was a French Protestant, not a French Catholic, but this is by the by. The other great blame was that this was some sort of act of God. The image on the right is called the Golden Boy of Pye Corner. Just up near Smithfield, it's where the flames, it's just beyond the Old Bailey, just beyond Newgate, where the flames in the northwest stopped. And many people, and there's an older image of it here, on which is written that the Great Fire was a God's punishment, particularly with this golden boy here, a punishment for gluttony, that it had started in Pudding Lane, had finished in Pye Corner. It is God punishing Londoners for their gluttony and licentiousness. There were others who thought it was God punishing London for executing the king, Charles I, at the end of the civil wars in 1649. Equally, others who thought it was God punishing Londoners for welcoming back the king, Charles II, in 1660. Some who believed it was God punishing the established church, others for Londoners being not religious enough. Whoever you wanted to blame, you could find a cause or a reason for doing it. This is the footprint showing where the fire broke out in Pudding Lane, the destruction of the Royal Exchange, of St. Paul's Cathedral. It's spreading up Fleet Street towards the sort of official ending of the City of London at Temple Bar. It has crossed the River Fleet, but it hasn't quite got to those boundaries of the City of London yet. The destruction within the city walls and within the footprint here, about 400 streets, over 13,000 houses. There are 70, 80, maybe 100,000 people homeless. They are camping out in Moorfields. The king, Charles II, rides up there the day after the fire, distributes gold coins, makes an announcement that the fire is an act of God. It is not the work of the French or the Dutch. 80% of this walled city is destroyed. You have 86 churches burnt down. On that Wednesday, Pepys climbs to, excuse me, I keep knocking the camera, climbs to a church tower just outside the limit of the flames here. It's called All Hallows Barking. The church is still there. And he says, I up to the top of Barking Steeple, and there saw the saddest sight of desolation that I ever saw. Everywhere great fires, oil cellars and brimstone and other things burning. Walked into Moorfields, our feet ready to burn, walking through the town among the hot coals, and find that Moorfields full of people and poor wretches carrying their goods there, and everybody keeping his goods together by themselves. And a great blessing it is to them that it is fair weather for them to keep abroad night and day. So again, showing some of Pepys's sort of sympathy for the people, his sort of acute knowledge or understanding of people. A couple of days later, John Evelyn walked through the city. I went this morning on foot from Whitehall, which is over on this side, over on the left, as far as London Bridge. So a walk of a couple of miles through the late Fleet Street, Ludgate Hill by St. Paul's, Cheapside, Exchange, Bishopsgate, all around this area here, Aldersgate and out to Moorfields, thence through Cornhill with extraordinary difficulty, clambering over heaps of yet smoking rubbish and frequently mistaking where I was, the ground under my feet so hot that it even burnt the soles off my shoes. So you have got this great smouldering city, a ruin, a desolation. We have got, though, not many records of people being killed. You read some of the histories and they say 6 people, 8 people, maybe a dozen people killed. Records aren't particularly good, but the flames moved, even though you've got this incredibly strong wind, the flames are moving at walking pace. They're traveling about 30 meters an hour. I mean, much slower than walking pace. It's very possible to outrun the fire. You have, though, this intense heat. You have the flames appearing streets away from the main fire. So it is likely that some people were caught. It is likely that some people were incinerated beyond recognition. But most of the contemporary accounts are surprised at how few people are killed in the fire. We are probably talking maybe dozens, maybe the low hundreds. Certainly no more than 250, 300 people killed in this hugely destructive fire. Although I have to add the caveat that no one really knows. This is sort of more modern sort of statistical analysis that says there may have been 100, 200, 300 people killed. Certainly more than that handful that is sort of common currency for it. But it is a destructive of property, not destructive of humanity. The rebuilding, or the plans for the rebuilding, start almost immediately. Hooke, great friend of Wren, we think this diagram on the left is his plan for the rebuilding of it, to build it up on a grid system, big blocks of houses. On the right, you have a slightly more ornate plan by John Evelyn for rebuilding the city. The most famous one is one that was conceived by Christopher Wren, a new St. Paul's Cathedral, boulevards, piazzas, all then congregating on the Royal Exchange, leading from piazzas around London Bridge. It is, I mean, it did actually get sort of discussed. Wren is very much connected to the court. The king would have loved to have built a new city, a new modern city with these wide boulevards, something rich, something to reflect the glory that he thought London should be. But it was rather impractical. There would have had to have been a huge amount of compulsory purchase of plots of land to make it happen. Everything would have had to have been redesigned. You also have that people are quite rapidly moving back to where their houses were and erecting little hovels, erecting sort of tents and buildings so that they can start their trade. The City of London has lost its livery houses, it's lost its exchange, it's lost its warehouses. It is wanting business to start back again. So it is very opposed to any wholesale redevelopment of the city. Part of what they want is to just get it back as quickly as they possibly could. It is rebuilt pretty much on the same street plan it existed before. Some of the streets are made wider. There are new building regulations that allow for wider streets, no overhanging signs, no jettied buildings. So everything had to be flush with the street. Most of the building regulations want things built in brick and tile. This does happen, but you shouldn't think of it like a big bang. It is not everything is built like that. Not all the streets are widened. But as the rebuilding progresses and as rebuilding of rebuilding progresses, we get a new looking city with these flush properties. Fire courts, as they're called, are set up to determine who owns what plot of land. Robert Hooke, mentioned him before, the scientist, the great friend of Wren, works night and day to put together a plan of who owns what, dividing the land. So if a little bit has to be nibbled away by a wider street, that is allocated to those property owners. A coal tax, a tax on coal coming into the London area for miles around London, is imposed to pay for the rebuilding of the major public building, like the roof on the Guildhall, like the Royal Exchange, like St. Paul's Cathedral. Individual properties are the responsibility of the leaseholders of the buildings. Most people rent their properties at this time, and part of your lease says that any damage has to be repaired by you. So they become responsible for rebuilding the houses that they live in. But a law is passed to freeze the rents. So, and in fact, to curtail the rents for a number of years. So some of the bigger landowners, that includes schools, some of the churches around there, some of the big merchants, suffer a loss of income for the next decade as the rental money is cut back for the rebuilding of the houses themselves. And things are built modern. There's no sense that we would have today that things should be rebuilt how they look. The city is built in full modernity. This just to overprint on a current modern map of London of the extent of the fire. There is the new London Bridge. The old London Bridge would have run a little bit further east, closer to Pudding Lane. And even on this, you can still see in the City of London, you have got essentially the medieval footprint of the city. The road layout does not change significantly. As I say, some of the streets are widened. In later centuries, new streets are knocked through, wider streets are put in, but drop a time traveller from 1600 into modern day London, and they would be amazed at the height of the buildings, the cleanliness of the streets, but they would still be able to navigate their way from the Tower of London to St. Paul's Cathedral, following that old street plan. One of the big memorials to it is Wren and Hook's monument, a great fluted Doric column that was built between 1671 and 1677. So started within 5 years of the building. It stands on that the site of that first church that was destroyed on the night of the 2nd of September on Fish Street Hill. That, until the building of the newer London bridges in the 1800s, was the main road from London Bridge into the City of London. And remember, at this point, there is only one bridge across the Thames. So the first thing you saw as you emerged on the North Bank from London Bridge would have been this new monument. It has above it this great golden basket of flame. There was some discussion as to whether it should have a statue of Charles II on it, or a phoenix. We'll come to a phoenix in a second, but a representation of the fire is what still stands, regilded a few years ago. It's 202 feet tall, because it is the site of where it is 202 feet from the site of Mr. Farriner's baker's shop, and it is a column that you can walk up. There is a spiral staircase, 311 steps, and you appear on this little balcony and can look around. These days, what you see are some of the taller buildings in the City of London hemming in that view. But up until this century, it would have afforded great views over the City of London. The balcony here, you may notice these days, has got a sort of netting or a sort of screen around it. That's because it's been the site of 6 suicides in its history, and by one of those curious sort of anomalies of London, 3 of those 6 people who committed suicide were bakers. So whether this is some psychic damage they're suffering from the fault of Mr. Farriner, that they are feeling they need to assuage that debt or not, who knows. On the base, might just see it here, is this great plaque, which was done by a sculptor called Caius Kibber, who was a great favorite of Wren and Hooke. I found out only today, actually, that he spent 6 years carving this frieze, and he had been imprisoned for debt. He was allowed out every day to do a bit of carving and then had to go back to jail each evening to be locked up. So this is quite a wonderful piece of work by a jailbird. It is allegorical. Here on the left is the city of London, consumed in grief, being helped to her feet by Father Time and by Mercury and trade. Over on this side, on the right, you have got Charles II, dressed for reasons that were probably apparent at the time as a Roman emperor. Behind him is his brother, the Duke of York, later James II, and he is instructing liberty and the spirit of architecture to rebuild the city greater and bigger than it was before. You can see flames on the left. On the right, you can see the scaffolding and the new city going up. And underneath is jealousy. This is the jealous Europeans who will see this new beautiful city emerging from the ashes of the old, and have their hearts consumed with jealousy by the construction of it. The greatest of the buildings that is constructed after the Great Fire is Sir Christopher Wren's new St. Paul's Cathedral. Wren is given the commission as a surveyor of the city to rebuild many of the churches. There are 87 churches that have been destroyed in the city. Some aren't rebuilt, but Wren rebuilds or is in overall command of rebuilding 51 of those, many of which still survive, many of which needed to be rebuilt again after the Blitz, after the Second World War, some of which burnt down completely in the Second World War, and we can just see the scars again. That Blitz in December 1940 being known as the Second Great Fire of London. But his masterwork, his genius, one of the greatest buildings in the world, is the great dome of St. Paul's Cathedral, which Wren was the architect for. To give you some idea of the destruction, it took him 7 years to clear the site before the building could recommence. And it took 37 years to build this new cathedral, its first services taking place in 1707 in the reign of Queen Anne. There it still stands, there it still overlooks a symbol of London emerging from the flames, and part of that growth of the city that took place afterwards. I mentioned that before the fire it had a population of maybe 450,000. By 1700, even after the destruction that took place, the population has risen to 600,000. By the end of the next century, it is more than 1 million. And by 1900, you've got 5 million people. It is the biggest city in the world. One thing that the fire does is kickstart development and investment, the building of a new modern trade-based city. It had been on that route before. The plague, the fire checks it for a while, but after those have gone, it just continues. On the side, on the south transept, facing the river, in the pediment there on St. Paul's Cathedral, is a phoenix arising from the flames. The wording underneath it, the myth of this is that as Wren was laying out the plan of St. Paul's on the ground, he asked a workman to go and get him a fragment of stone to mark the point where the center of the dome was. And the workman went off, found a little bit of cracked gravestone, brought it over, and on that cracked gravestone was written the word "Resurgam, I shall rise again." And this and the phoenix becomes a symbol of late 17th century London. The phoenix arising stronger, greater, and more powerful from the flames that would have consumed it. And Resurgam, rising again, becomes the motto of the new city. Thank you very much. I will stop sharing and see if anyone's got any questions in a second. Apologies again at the beginning of this for that horrible cock up with all of the